My name is Brian White. I'm a senior consultant in product marketing at Dell Technologies. And today I have two of my good friends, Jim Shook and Stephen Granite, joining me to discuss some recommendations on how to survive a ransomware attack. Jim and Steve, introduce yourself, please.
Brian, it's great to be here with you and Steve today. I'm the global director for our cybersecurity and compliance practice. Had this practice for about 10 years. We help our customers globally understand and develop solutions and capabilities for these ransomware destructive attacks that we see everywhere.
Thanks, Jim. So I'm Steve Granite from Dell Services, and I'm responsible on a global basis for our cybersecurity solutions and our strategic partnerships. Brian?
Awesome. Well, thanks, guys, for joining me today. Let's jump right into this discussion. Surviving a ransomware attack. You know, and we all know that it's going to happen. Yet, is anyone prepared for it? Doesn't matter the size of the industry, it's going to happen. And if you don't prepare for it, you really won't stay in business. So let's jump right into a few of these recommendations. Jim, I'm going to start with you. Understanding how to maintain an incident response and recovery plan is important. Give me some details on what do you think on it.
It's a really important area. And Brian, what I've seen is a lot of people have a written incident response plan. And if they had an attack, they would go find it somewhere, dust it off, and start to read it, which isn't a good scenario to be in. So you need to have a plan that isn't just incident response with the idea that it's just communications, but who are you going to call? How are you going to recover from the event? And you need to bring the right people in and drill this and simulate it so that if it does happen, everybody knows what they're doing.
Perfect. And you hit on that thing. Everybody needs to know what they're doing. So Stephen, when you think about everybody needing to know, you have to manage the communications internally and externally. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Sure. I just want to take one step back, which is I think it's important for everybody to also understand that, you know, when we talk about an incident, incidents come about in many different ways. And there's really when the attack happens, there's the attack and I'm held for ransom, I'm shut down. And then there's also the attack where information is stolen. And so we really need to think through both of those. But in terms of the communication aspect of things, kind of as Jim said, right? You need a plan that you can literally go to the shelf and pull down. You also need to make sure that you're testing that plan. And really you want to have, different forms of communication, the different templates that you might need to communicate out to the world, if you will. And that includes, both internal communication, external communication to customers. You also need to do it kind of like in that timely fashion to make sure that people know. Again, remember that when somebody is attacked, your entire email system, may be down. And so you kind of need to think through how am I going to communicate? You may not even have a phone system to operate because there's been customers, hospitals that we've worked with, for example, where their entire communication internally was shut down. So you really need to think through all these things. And of course, the appropriate regulations you may need to meet.
Yeah, I think that is, you hit right on here, right? Very important. Understand the people, the regulations, and things in that work order, and even that work form, how you got to communicate. I think that's really important. So great stuff, great stuff. The next thing that you think about when it comes to this is having a robust data protection solution, plan, strategy in place. Jim, how important is data protection in helping you survive a ransomware attack?
Yeah, if you think about what Steve's saying, so we use the term severe but plausible. So it's a severe attack. It wasn't Jim's laptop that got encrypted. It was a chunk of the infrastructure. How are you going to recover? You need to have data that you can use to replace the encrypted data, or you're stuck paying a ransom, which I know we'll talk about a little bit later. So the steps that you take ahead of time to protect data from the attack things like immutability, things like cyber vaulting and isolation and other capabilities will help you to have more of that data available so that when you do your incident response and your recovery steps, you actually have some data that you can trust, or at least to validate, that will enable you to recover your systems. Because remember, if they've encrypted, say, your virtual machines, you don't have those. If they've stolen your data on top of it, you've got two problems, but we're really dealing more with that recovery phase where the data's been encrypted or potentially destroyed.
Right, right. And when you think about the data protection and even the communication, the incident response, one of the big things that people sneak into systems are obsolete systems, right? Networks and connections, right? When you think of data protection, you may be protecting or having backups of old obsolete systems. It's probably good to decommission them. When you think, even though you got a backup, but you don't want anybody to sneak in on those old systems that are outdated, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So, Jim, you also brought up paying the ransom. I'm going to throw this at Steven. You can't assume that just because you pay the ransom, everything is going to be okay. Steven, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, there's this fallacy that basically says, okay, we're going to have our breach coach, if you will, who typically is a law firm that will act as the intermediate to negotiate. But the reality is, and this is hysterical when you think about it, you're dealing with dishonest people, in many cases nation states or cyber, gangs that are around the world that don't necessarily have credibility. The industry has gotten to the point right now where you tend to know that there are certain groups that if they act and if you negotiate, they will, if you will, return the keys. There's plenty of others that you don't know about. So I think, again, taking the steps to get to that point, look, it's not for us to say you should or you shouldn't negotiate, right? Because there's been situations, recently, for example, in the news, there were two casinos. They both got breached, right? Casino A negotiated. Casino B did not negotiate. And in many ways, Casino B that didn't negotiate may have actually come out ahead, right? Even though there was a lot of pain, to the customers and to the experience and everything else. So I don't think it's a simple pay or not pay, right? There's experts that are in this industry that really need to think it through and work with the customer, on the appropriate strategy. But I think it's all about look, that's one part of it, but you still need to get your business back to operation. And I think that's really the real critical component. How do I go back to restoring to my steady state? What are my priorities, that I need? What are the different applications and the dependencies and the infrastructure? And, kind of as Jim said, do I have a viable recovery source and a recoverable target that I can, do I have data that's free from compromise? I mean, these are all important considerations that you need to think about.
Brian, there's a lot of education in this space too. And I would say one takeaway for people on this, if you don't know this, if you pay the ransom, you don't get your systems back right away. You don't plug in this key and everything goes back to normal. Assuming, as Steve says, you have a reputable criminal, you will get a decoder that works very slowly. You have to decrypt, and oftentimes there are many keys involved, all of the data. You need a place to land that data because now you've got an encrypted copy and a decrypted copy. You've got to test it. You've got to rebuild all these systems. I know I've seen studies where it's 2 to 3 times as long to recover and perhaps 8 times as expensive. Now, as you said, sometimes people have to pay the ransom. They have choice. But that's why working through this and understanding we need to do all the things we can so we're not in a position where that's our only option. That's really important because it's not a great option.
Yeah, and just one more thing to them, which is important, which is just because you get the key back, right, and you think you can get back to operating your business, one quick question, which is, do we know, is the adversary completely out of our environment? So there's an entire, forensics component, for example, we at Dell do that, where you need to basically make sure, kind of in layman's terms, is the fire out in your house? And also what started that fire? Because without those two critical pieces of information, you're leaving yourself vulnerable. And don't think for a minute that that bad person, the adversary, hasn't, sold that information to another company who's going to hit you. Statistically, if you've been hit, you are more liable to get hit again. That is so. Brian?
Exactly. And all great points. And you brought up even training and education, right? When you think of the ransomware attacks that are happening, all the things that happen post ransomware attack, the idea is to try to prevent or help not have the ransomware attack affect so much. So definitely training and educating your employees on how to prevent ransomware attacks from coming into play is important when it comes to a business as well. Right? So I want to wrap up real quick, right? We talked about maintaining the incident response and recovery plan, managing communication internally and externally, ensuring a robust backup data protection plan or strategy in place, right? Don't assume paying that ransom, everything's going to be okay. And make sure you train and educate your employees. Jim and Steve, any last words that you wanted to?
I would say, as Jim kind of alluded to earlier about the kind of practice, right? This is not something that you want to happen and you're not prepared for. Look, we know that it's going to happen. Statistically, it's going to happen. As we always say, it's a question of when it's going to happen, but there are steps that you can take to help you, right? No different than a burglar alarm for your house, a fire alarm for your house, a plan for your family, right? They're all basic things. And again, those can be prepared. Chip?
Do a tabletop or some type of simulation. If you can get, say, your cyber insurer, or we will sit down with you and sit down with some parties and walk through what does this look like, it will be enlightening. And then you can take it to the next step after that. But making it real, bringing the right people together and understanding what really happens is critically important to starting to solve for it.
Yeah, and there are tools, as Jim said. I mean, the penetration test and attack simulation, that's what they're really all about, so worth doing.
Awesome. Well, this has been a great discussion. Jim, Steven, thank you for joining me today. And we thank you all for spending time with us today. So make sure you check out Dell Technologies Cybersecurity Awareness Month, because Dell is always committed to helping customers and partners understand the risks, how to mitigate, and ways to help your business continue growing in the case of a cyber attack. So thank you and have a great day.